According to the Texas Tribune, 3 Venezuelan migrants flown from San Antonio, Texas to Martha's Vineyard last week filed a lawsuit against Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and other Florida officials. The lawsuit alleges that the migrants were tricked into traveling on the airplane with false promises of money, work, housing, and food. The Texas Tribune says the suit claims DeSantis and officials, quote, designed and executed a premeditated, fraudulent, and illegal scheme centered on exploiting this vulnerability for the sole purpose of advancing their own personal financial and political interests. Democratic strategist Demisha Cross and president of Bienvenido, Abraham Enriquez, are here to weigh in on this with us. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
All right, I want to ask you first, Abraham, what do you make of this argument that this was a misrepresentation, that people would not have gone on the plane but for being induced with false promises?
Thank you, Brianna. Well, I first want to start off by saying that as a first-generation Mexican-American, I'm very sympathetic to the immigrant community and what's really going on at the border right now. However, this lawsuit really does strike me a little bit as election year politics, because as you and I now know, Florida has released the waivers that the immigrants or migrants signed both in English and in Spanish. But let's be honest, these migrants were in pretty bad shape at the Texas border, right? And they were flown to a sanctuary city where they were getting lodging, food, water, provided for resources. And when you look at what's going on in Texas and Arizona and even Florida, over 2 million illegal crossings has happened this year alone. Our cities are pretty overwhelmed and we can't really sustain this. So, if you live in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, it's easy for you to have this kind of indifferent opinion on open border policies. But down here in Texas, specifically South Texas, where I'm at today, these are our schools, these are our communities, and these are our resources that are being strained.
Yeah, what do you think about this topic, Amisha? Obviously, there's been a lot of outrage from Democrats, from the media about what DeSantis has done here. What do you think about it?
I'm disgusted. As a native of Chicago, a sanctuary city and a sanctuary state, and a state that was also in a city that also saw a busing of undocumented immigrants as well, the reaction that I have is the same as many Democratic leaders, in the sense that this is atrocious. It's a humanitarian crisis. Republicans, specifically those who are eyeing the presidential election in 2024, are utilizing this to bolster their base. They're utilizing this tool and creating this pawn game of human lives. It's disgusting, because these are individuals. These undocumented individuals are people who are running away from communist terrorism. These are people who are running to save their lives. These are people who are sick. These are people who need assistance. These are people who we should be doing our best to ensure are taken care of. And I think that in Florida, where we see Ron DeSantis doing this, where we see a governor who literally earmarked $12 million to ensure that he was dehumanizing and providing the worst treatment to these individuals and shipping them to places that they had never been, oftentimes without any knowledge of or without any awareness of where they were going. And I compare what we just saw happen with the immigrants in Martha's Vineyard to, quite frankly, a kidnapping of sorts. You tell people that you're going to give them certain things: food, shelter, jobs, money. In many ways, they knew that these were lies to begin with. It's frustrating that they were able to actually bamboozle these individuals. And to be quite frank, individuals who are in poverty, whether they are undocumented or whether they are American citizens, if you promise them the core elements of life and safety, they are going to jump on that. I know people on the south side of Chicago, you talk to them about free food, housing, being able to be safe, they're going to go wherever you ship them off to. So it's not erroneous to think that these individuals would sign up for these things. The issue is that they were misled. The issue is that they were positing humanitarian effort and humanitarian relief outside of legitimate housing supports that are temporary housing supports for undocumented immigrants. They lied to these individuals and they put them in places that they should not have been. That is frustrating.
Well, Abraham, let me just ask you this, because, I know a lot of folks aren't going to be persuaded. They're going to say, well, if they signed something, then they accepted the risk, they accepted what was being offered to them. But I wonder, you brought up this question of resources, and according to the lawsuit, defendants paid $615,000 for chartered planes at the cost of $12,300 per passenger. And this is out of what is apparently about a $12 million fund for relocating migrants. Is this the best use for a party that is, I think, really focused on government waste and spending funding of resources to help this population get through the tangled web of immigration services we have in this country?
Well, I really want to emphasize that Governor DeSantis, Governor Abbott have only taken the lead in the example of President Biden. I mean, I don't think we should forget when President Biden, in the middle of the night, was flying immigrants all over the country to drop them off into other red states, right? And so when we look at the budget and we look at the allocation, the resources to putting immigrants and migrants in sanctuary cities where their laws and their policies actually promote open border crossings and illegal crossings, I think when you come down to South Texas and you spend time on the border, Brownsville, El Paso, where I'm at, you look at the way migrants are being treated, the way migrants are being sheltered. It's almost borderline inhumane because we just can't keep up with the amount of illegal crossings that are happening.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Abraham, but I'm just curious about this one question. Obviously, I have many criticisms of Joe Biden, but unless the bar is everything that Joe Biden does, the Republican Party should actually match. I'm curious whether you think this is actually a good use of resources.
Flying migrants who are being overcrowded in shelters that sometimes have no food, no water, no shelters, to cities that are in the book sanctuary cities that promote giving food, water, and shelter, to me absolutely makes sense.
Why keep $12,000 a migrant?
Whatever it takes to make sure that these migrants are being well taken care of. Yes.
Yeah, Amisha, I think this goes to a point that I've made on the show, which is that while I do agree with you that this is a kind of political stunt, it is the case that migrants are free to move throughout the country if they've sought asylum status while their claims are adjudicated. There is no expectation or requirement that they stay in Texas or wherever else. And in fact, they are sometimes moved by the federal government, especially if there's custody issues, if they're underage, you have to find housing for them. So while Martha's Vineyard might not have been the ideal destination, it is the case that migrants can and will be moved of their own volition and by the government throughout the country to places like Chicago, like New York, etc. So I think it's a little confusing, or for lack of a better term, for some Democratic officials and media people to say that we're just not prepared to have these people. I mean, if you have these policies, you're going to get these people eventually, is the argument.
Acting within the ramifications of federal government, which there are certain things, to your point, that I believe immigration reform processes should address. But with that being said, when immigration, border security, when these individuals move folks around, that is a very different conversation than what we're seeing from governors who don't even have the status point to make those decisions on their own. So watching this happen and watching these individuals be inhumanely treated in the process is quite frankly disgusting. With that being said, yes, a lot of the cities that they are going to, with the exception of Martha's Vineyard, are larger cities, have more robust resources, a different type of tax base. That is in fact true. I don't expect for small town Texas to have the same as New York or LA or Chicago. But with that being said, I do believe that if Republicans really wanted to help migrants, as was somewhat stated by the other panelists, if it was about them trying to provide food, shelter, or do things of that sort in places where it would make sense for them, they would also be working with the federal government. They would be talking to their Republican counterparts in D.C., in Congress, to be able to move forward comprehensive immigration reform. They are refusing to do that. There is an immigration crisis, but that crisis isn't going to be solved by DeSantis or Abbott basically busing or flying whomever they feel like to states that they have in angst against, and to basically create this pseudo regime against Democratic run cities and Democratic run states. That's what is happening. They're using these individuals as pawns and hoping that it will help flip some seats or in the Republicans' favor come midterms. That's what's happening here. This has nothing to do with overrun cities. This has nothing to do with them actually trying to mobilize and shift resources or get assistance for these individuals. They could care less. They are utilizing this basically as a slap in the face to Democratic administrations.
Well, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. I want to thank both of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this. Stick around.